You're watching The Lookout, a production of the Division of World Languages and Cultural Studies here at Minot State University. I'm your host, Samuel Stinson. On the program today, we have Ron Fischer from MSU. Ron is finishing up 38 years in the classroom and is retiring, and 22 of those years he spent teaching here at MSU. But Ron isn't just a teacher, he's also a writer. His play, A Dance on Crumbling Earth, won the Montana Centennial Production Award. He also wrote a collection of stories, Journeys into Open Country, which won a Montana Arts Council's First Book Award. So Ron, so grateful to have you on the program today. Thank you again for being willing to talk about your career and what's up next.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Thank you for inviting me to the program here and for those nice words of introduction. Well, actually, I've started a new job, so I'm employed. So what I retired from was being a faculty person, from being a professor, and I've gone on to becoming a counselor in addiction treatment. And actually, a lot of my skills as a faculty person teaching English, where I taught Native American Lit, and many people in treatment I'm working with are Native Americans, but teaching literature and writing is coming in very handy, and creative writing, because they found that to help people recover their lives, to help them through this dependency and get on to a more meaningful, purposeful life, that they need to be in an enriched environment. And what that means is they have things to do. So they're not thinking about what they've done in the past or what they've used in the past, but they're starting a new life. And so I get to offer things like a creative writing class. In fact, the art therapy class is really what it is. It isn't just writing. I mean, there are some people who want to come and do music, play Native American flutes and drumming, so it goes beyond just bibliotherapy, but there's some of that. We'll have book discussions, and the art therapy is we'll do art. The bibliotherapy is we'll read books and discuss them, which is what we did in class, and then along with that, we're going to have movie nights. And I used to teach the film class here, the intro to film class, and so with them, there'll be kind of more films related to recovery, I admit that, and to their culture. But it's the discussions that's most important in film class. You watch a film, and then you need to process what you've seen. And really, in this case, it's people connecting their own lives to a movie or to a book or to the art they're creating. So I get to do that in addition to doing one-on-one counseling and group counseling, which I just love to do. And it's helping people work through a part of themselves that they tend to want to avoid. That's their feelings. And so those emotions, a lot of people use to run away from their feelings. And what we're trying to do in treatment is say, you can manage these feelings. You can also live with them. And you can also accept them and find that you have the strength to express a whole range of emotions. And I mean, some emotions are appropriate. Somebody dies, grief is an appropriate, pain is an appropriate emotion. And just working through that grief, letting it come out. It will never go away. You'll always have memories that may trigger it. But the pain, it's like yoga stretches. You stretch till it hurts. And guess what? You find, I can survive this.
So Ron, I think it's very interesting that you've chosen a new career that is a blend or a synthesis of virtually everything that you've done in terms of communicating with students, communicating with art, and helping in a therapeutic context. So let's go back a few steps, and I want to ask you a question about your beginning, the beginning of the whole thing. What first brought you into a classroom to be a teacher?
Well, actually, I wanted to be a writer, and I started a college 10 years. I started at Montana Tech, which is in Butte, Montana, and it's a mining school, mining engineering. And I started there, but knowing that I wanted to become an English teacher. And so I had to transfer to another college, Western Montana College in Dillon. So my undergraduate career was at both of those colleges. And while I was going to school, and this is 10 years after I graduated from high school, I'd worked some jobs, worked at the smelter for the Anaconda Company in Butte. And then at the time that I started college, I was working at hotels as a chauffeur, shuttling people to the airport or to trains or to their trucks. So it wasn't a bad job. I enjoyed it. But as I became more of a reader, and I've always been a reader, and those 10 years I was out, I did a lot of reading in philosophy and psychology, actually. Carl Jung, I tried to read through his massive 20-some volumes. I read the first three. And of course, when you read somebody like Carl Jung in that mind, you think, oh, I understand all of life, which is how I felt. I thought, oh, I can understand all literature, all religion, all, you name it. Such illusions of being young. But no, I wanted to be a writer. And I picked up a book in a bookstore written by Richard Hugo. And here's his collected works, which is called Making Certain It Goes On. But I picked up this book and I read a poem, and I'd taken ththose survey classes in British Lit and American Lit. And I read a poem about Drummond, Montana. It's on the way to Missoula. I was born in Missoula. I know the curve of the highway around that town and the highway patrolman who sits there to give you a ticket. I've passed him many times. And I thought, you can write a poem about Drummond, Montana and the cop that sits on the highway? And it shocked me. And it was nothing like the stuff they give you in the survey classes. It was places I could identify. I said, I know that cop, I've seen that cop. And his poetry, as I began reading it, there was one. He was from Seattle, a place called White Center. And he's got a book by that name. And he lived at the very end, the last street in White Center, which is right against it is the Pacific Ocean, and the street was named West Marginal Way. You're at the end of North America, the end of the continent. It's the Pacific Ocean, and you live on a street called West Marginal Way, and you become a student of Theodor Retke and a poet yourself. He was a nationally known poet. And I connected, and a lot of people did. A lot of people in Montana and a lot of people I've known over my life really connected to his poetry. It speaks to you. It speaks about life as you live it, as the kind of life I lived growing up. White Center was much like Anaconda, and he writes about the poem I read there in White Center was about helping a drunk who stumbled out in the field and couldn't get up. And I've been there. There was an alcoholic woman who fell between two garbage cans, broke her glasses. Her face was all, shattered with glass and bloody. And her son said, wait here while I go get help. So I had to wait with this drunk woman who was trying to climb up my arm to stand up, and she couldn't. She was drunk. And he has a poem about helping the drunk in the fields. And I thought, I've been there. I've done that. Almost every poem that he wrote, I connected with my own life. And I thought, I didn't know you could write stuff like this. I thought it had to be like Ode to a Grecian Urn. And it doesn't at all. And so that inspired me to be a writer. He was still living at that time. And I started teaching school. He was still alive. I was teaching at a high school in Butte. And I wanted to go the next year and study with him and get my master's, my Master of Fine Arts in Creative Writing as a student of his. Unfortunately, he passed away. So I didn't get to be a student of his, but I am working on a book as a tribute to his poetry, because nobody has published a critical book on his writing, and I feel called to do so. So that was kind of my beginnings. I realized I could not make a living as a poet, although I've been writing poems and plays and short stories and novels. I have 5 manuscripts. I realized, well, I'm not going to make money on this. I wasn't that driven to make money. I was driven to be more a creative writer. So it was the imagination, the creativity that pulled me, not so much the money. But I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, I ought to take up a trade like teaching writing. So that's how it got me in. I thought, gee, I'm going to get paid for teaching writing and for reading books. How nice is that? So I started out as a teacher, but wanted to move more and more to a higher level, a higher depth of virtuosity as a writer. So I went on to get that MFA and then a Doctor of Arts from Idaho State.
So let me ask you about writing itself, since you talked about your manuscripts. So what do you think is important in representing characters while you're writing? What, as a writer, as somebody who crafts stories around characters, what's significant about characters?
Well, I would say it's the situations they get in. Of course, they bring a personality to that, and the way that personality reacts to the problem. I mean, stories are about problems. You know, if everything's going right in a person's life, there's not much story there. But as soon as things start going wrong and people have to deal with that, and I think that's what interests us in story. Well, yeah, if that happened to me, what would I do? How would I handle that? And so you're kind of a voyeur as a reader to looking into how this person is going to react. And I think characters are actually, in many ways, composites of ourselves. We create them, we exaggerate parts of ourselves, or we explore parts of our forbidden selves. You know, I could never do that. But, you know, stories have to have bullies and bad guys and people who will do things you can't do. So they become part of that story because they have to test. They have to test the character who is dealing with the conflict. And I think every parent knows that. Some children are very compliant. As a professor, I know that there are compliant students, about half, maybe 60% of the class. About 10% of them are not. They're very strong-willed, and I may have been that student myself. Very independent, very strong-willed. They want to do things their way, and they will test to see how far they can get. That's about 10% of the students in a classroom. And the other 30% are kind of fence sitters. They want to see how far those the ones who are strong-willed can push it, you know, and they'll join in if they can. So I found teaching is like that, and parenting is like that too. You know, you've got to learn how to deal with the strong-willed kid. You know, you got to say, stop kicking the soccer ball in the house. And if you walk out of the room and he kicks it, you take the soccer ball away from him. Or you don't walk out of the room. You say, stop kicking the soccer ball. And you stay there, make sure he doesn't kick it. You say, let's find something for you to do. So you learn as a parent and as a teacher how to deal with these strong-willed people. And I used to be a little bit afraid of putting those kinds of characters into the story because I don't identify with those bullies. You know, I tended to be the victim in my life, which means I had to cope with them. So how am I going to write bullies whom I know very well as characters when I kind of shy away from them, want to avoid them? And I found, you know, they're necessary for the story. And then if we ask ourselves, well, how do they get that way? What shaped them? Why are that way? They become very interesting. So I actually think writing is about following your curiosity, growing that inquisitive nature and saying, here's a person and he's going to do these bad things to my favorite character here. But why is he doing these things? What's his justification? Where's his point of view? He's thinking he's doing something that is good for him. It's wrong for everybody else, but for him, it's the right thing to do. Now, why is that? So I think writing is really coming to know those people by asking those questions. Why are you the way you are? The kinds of questions I ask to people in counseling, you know, how did you get here? You know, what were the consequences? What did you know, here you wanted to do this. Now, why did you think that was a good thing to do? It's that processing it with them. So writing is no different, really.
Yeah, I keep thinking about the old adage, the old advice, right? In writing characters, to kill your darlings, right? To say, take that character and torture them, do everything you can to make them suffer and give them problems. And the reader will love you because they'll think it's interesting. But from the writer's standpoint, somebody just beginning to write fiction, right? They'll say, well, I can't do that. How can I be mean to these characters?
Exactly.
So, do you feel like you get a lot of, in your own writing, your own life experience? You mentioned that you have to create a version of yourself in the characters, but there's also the old adage to write what you know. Do you feel like that's still true when it comes to writing the material that you write?
Yeah, I think I just finished today, as a matter of fact. I wrote my last poem. I have 64 poems in that book. I started it in January. Uh, in the World Lit classes, my project, I always give students a project to do. And as an exercise in a poet that we were reading, Rilke, we read his poem, The Panther. And I thought, well, that's everybody write an animal poem. So I wrote one about a whale. Whales breaching, they lift themselves out of the water. They're skydiving, they're not diving into an ocean, they're diving into the sky. And they come up, when they come down, that splash is enormous, but it shreds their skin off of them. And what the researchers think is happening is that they're actually trying to clean all the barnacles and parasites that have clung to them off of them. But it's amazing. And some of those whales can leap. And imagine, they weigh tons. They're huge. They're mammoths, They can pull themselves nearly completely out of the water. Can you imagine that? Just what a skydive that is. So, yeah, all the animals that I wrote about were animals connected to me. The last animal I wrote about was a cat, Misha, who's passed away. But in some way, I feed sparrows. Chickadees come to my feeders, and nuthatches. I wrote about each of them. I have dogs. I wrote a dog poem, but there are other ones. The spirit bears. These are white bears born from black bears, and it's not a mutant gene. It's a recessive gene. So a black bear gives birth to a white furred bear called a spirit bear. Very rare. They're only in the Pacific Northwest on islands. Um, I think that's amazing. I wanted to learn about. I've never seen one. I'd love to see one. Reading about them, so that interest, that curiosity that you keep in yourself. Oh, I want to find out. Oh, this is intriguing. This sounds wonderful. So even if you don't know things, it's your curiosity that moves you to discover that, and then it's so wonderful. I get so struck by awe, and when I read about just the elegance and grace and just the mystery of these animals, it so strikes me that I think, oh, I've got to write about this. And I get to do the voice thing. I get to pretend like I've actually seen one. And this is what the encounter was like. And that's the life of the imagination. You can go into that world, which is not our world, but imagine this alternative world, and it becomes just as real as if I had actually been on one of those islands and encountered a spirit bear. And I'd like to do that someday.
So you'd mentioned Rilke, and I keep thinking of Letters to a Young. Isn't it called Letters to a Young Poet? I think is the work. So for those who are trying to get started writing poetry or other types of writing, what kind of advice would you give to a young poet or to a young writer in that position?
Well, I would say don't overthink it. Don't try too hard. Don't try to impress people with the metaphors or the words that you use. Just write from the heart, write honest. And it may be very simple and it may be very childlike, but sometimes those poems, those words that you choose have the most powerful. As my teacher, Hugo, used to say, uh, you got to write a lot of poems. He says you got to stand up on top of the mountain if you're going to get hit by lightning. Not every poem you write is a lightning strike, but if you keep writing a bunch of poems, the lightning's going to hit you. And I think it's that way. I think it's don't invest too much. You never know when the lightning hits, and it may not be you who recognize it. Oh boy, I got hit by blue iced lightning. No, it may be somebody else who says, this is very wonderful. This is great. I was writing a play when I was teaching at Western Montana College, and I had a conference with a student. She came in. I was working on the play monologue I'd just written. And I said, and I wasn't sure, because it was a woman and it was her monologue. And I wasn't sure that if I'd really gotten the reality of that character. So I asked her, I said, could I read this to you? Could you tell me, you're a woman. Could you tell me, does this sound like the way a woman would express herself? And I read it to her, and she was just in this state of awe and stunned, just looking at me. It's wonderful. It's wonderful, Dr. Fischer, she said. You have nailed it. It's just beautiful. And I knew it. I knew it when I heard that from her, that play would actually get produced, and it did. It did. But sometimes you need that feedback from others to tell you, wow, the lightning has struck here. The thunder is rolling. So I would say, keep at it. Keep doing it. The more you do it, the better you're going to get at that, because it's going to, and get feedback from others. But you're going to feel when it's right, and nobody can tell you that. You're going to feel when your voice is there, and the way you find your voice is by being confident in that voice, by writing it.
Okay, so Ron, so let me ask you this. What is upcoming for you then after retiring from MSU, but not fully retiring, as you noted? What's up next? What is your plan, and are you going to stay in North Dakota, do you think?
Well, I grew up in Montana, and I do miss Montana. Mainly, I grew up in Western Montana, which is a forested area. I have to admit, the towns I grew up in, Butte and Anaconda, were mining towns, but mining stopped in the 80s, 40 years ago. And that forest regenerates. It's coming back. It's a beautiful area. And I'm very familiar with the area. I just love it there. So I've always missed Montana. Still to this day, I'm past 70. I'm 70. When I dream of home, it's always Anaconda, where I grew up. I don't dream of any of the cities I've lived in. I've lived in Phoenix and Pocatello and Missoula and Butte, of course, and Minot here, Valley City. But I always dream Anaconda. So it's embedded in me. And I'm thinking about going back there. I've been kind of looking at the real estate market, which is not a good market right now. It's a seller's market. But I'm interested in that. And because my work is telecounseling, I could live anywhere. So I'm not in any rush to decide where do I want to live. I have time to think about that and make a good choice and make a good buy on my next property.
Well, we've reached that time in the program where we have to say goodbye. But again, we thank you for viewing the program today. Just as a reminder, we've produced several dozen episodes of the Lookout podcast, and these are available on YouTube as well as on the KMSU app. If you haven't downloaded the KMSU app, you're missing out. The KMSU app is a great little tool for not only watching the Lookout podcast, but also the other programs at KMSU and listening to the KMSU radio station if you are so interested. That being said, it is time to say goodbye for this episode. So again, we'll close by saying this is Minot State University. Be seen, be heard, be inspired. And thanks again for watching.